All right, so hello everybody. Welcome to our third interactive workshop. And this interactive workshop will be the EEG feature extraction workshop 2. And this is going to be done in collaboration with DS3. So to learn more about our org or DS3's org, it will be the websites. And so a little bit about Neurotech at UCSD. Neurotech UCSD is affiliated with Neurotech X. We started in January 2020. Neurotech's faculty advisor is Professor Vikash Gilja of the TNEL Research Group under the ECU department. Neurotech at UCSD's connections are with Wearable Sensing, a neurotech headset company. Neurotech at UCSD also competes in annual student NTX competitions. And Neurotech's mission is to bring together students interested in neurotech and to provide a way to get involved in neurotechnology. Next. Oh, is
I can take this. Yeah. So, hi guys, my name is Tanvir. I am one of the machine learning workshops leads from DS3. So a little bit about us is DS3, fun fact about us as an organization, is we've kind of been around before the data science major at UCSD was a thing, where we were basically founded along with Professor Wojtek and a handful of like computer science students who wanted to go into data science. And since then, we've grown greatly to, allow for people who aren't even studying data science, but maybe studying other disciplines and want to apply data science techniques to their disciplines. We basically provide a community for people like that to be able to basically apply themselves. And we also provide many different workshops and other different resources for networking and all that sort of stuff in this realm. And yeah, if you want to learn more about us, we have social media with Facebook and also in Discord, and we also have a website right there.
all right. So for today's workshop, we'll be going over a refresher about the Kaggle competition, the Kaggle dataset, and what we went over in last time's workshop. We'll also be going over feature extraction concepts, dimensionality reduction, ML modeling, neural networks overview, notebook walkthroughs, and then the remaining of the workshop will be office hours until 8 p.m. So here are a couple of questions we would like you guys to answer before beginning the workshop. And they are, have you heard of dimensionality reduction before? And have you heard of neural networks before? So I guess what we can do for this poll is for the first question, you could raise your hand if you heard of dimensionality reduction before, if you are comfortable with it. Okay, so that's a few people who's heard of it before. What about neural networks? Have any of you heard of neural networks before? And once again, raise your hand if you heard of neural networks before.
I think that's everyone who's heard of neural networks here.
All right, perfect. All right, moving on. All right, so if you haven't yet, and if you still would like to participate in the neural data Kaggle competition, it's still not too late because by joining this competition, you get up to $100 of gift card prizes for if you are one of the top competitors. The competition will last until week 3 of winter 2021. And for this Kaggle competition, are to predict whether someone is thinking to move thinking to move their right or their left hand. And to join the Kaggle competition, you could go to the first link that was provided. To access the GitHub notebook, you click on the second link. And then for Discord updates, questions, or to find team members, you can actually go to the third link that was provided.
So just a quick recap. We defined the competition task as the motor imagery, meaning you are either thinking moving your left or right hand. And we designed the experiment by showing the error on the screen uh, in a fixed procedure as shown on the upper right. And we also define where the electrodes should be placed. Next slide. And just to remind where we are from last time, we first went over a very popular method for analyzing, particularly for this task called power bin features. We first um, of how we came to the power bins and what about it's most useful, and then we went over some of the more macro scale features such as time series features, in particular the Hadron's parameters that are going to provide some useful insights. And last but not least, some other useful instantaneous features such as phase coherence in the firing that are going to be pretty relevant for a lot of neuronal tests. Um, and then we just combine all of those features into a large data frame that we can now use to analyze um, for for the task. Any questions? And that's where we start for today's um, topic. That's going to be more exciting.
Neat. So to add on to your list of tools for analyzing neural data, we'll be analyzing one more feature extraction method, and then doing some dimensionality reduction modeling and neural networks with DS3. And then we'll go through the notebook for this time. And then for next time, we want to see if we can squeeze in another workshop. So if you're interested in the sign-in form, I'll just link it here again. There's another link inside of that that will allow you to give us more information as to like what you're interested in us covering in another workshop before the competition deadline. So yeah, feel free to let us know there. All right, so we'll get started. Last time we saw something like this where we are looking at power spectral densities, and they're visually helpful to sort of qualitatively understand what might be different between the two classes. But it can be kind of hard to quantify this in order for models to happen. So last time we saw how we could do this with power bins and sort of integrating over sections, like for example, alpha. However, there could be other ways that we want to do this. So let's sort of brainstorm a little bit together how we might be able to do this. So this is just the event type left PSD that we had on the previous slide. And sort of like how, by knowing like what the difference is between the left and right classes, how might we be able to sort of parameterize these squiggly lines in order for us to get those kind of features out? Does anyone have any ideas? You can raise your hand or type into text chat. Yeah, you can take the integral. So you take the integral over the entire thing. That would be kind of similar to the power bin model, except with a larger, larger window. So yeah, that's one way. I guess with integrals, you might be losing a lot of data too, right? Because you might sort of, it's kind of like averaging in the sense, but you're not really dividing by how many elements you're adding up. So in that sense, taking the integral might like sort of give you like an average value for the PSD, but there could be other stuff we want to take out from here too. And some of this background knowledge kind of comes from how neuroscience and most EEG signals look like, so that's fine if you don't really have too many ideas too. We'll sort of take a look at that. Okay. Does any of the officers have any ideas or? Derivatives and subintervals? Oh, that's a really interesting idea. Yeah, you could take, like, maybe the slope over here is much steeper than the one over here. And if you were to take another sample, seeing how that might differ. Yeah, it's a really good idea. It'll be kind of related to what we might talk about. Okay, yeah, we'll just dive in then. Okay, so those are some really great ideas. So similar to what we talked about with the derivative, there's like this slope that we can sort of see happen in both of these. In the orange versus the blue and the green cases, you can sort of see how there's a much steeper version in the orange than in the green and blue. This can be characterized as the exponent of this like sort of baseline that we see, that if we were to draw a line and just like ignore all these little bumps, we can get some parameter of an exponent. This actually is kind of called the 1 over f noise. And this is a common noise model that we see in biology, music, and economics. It's also known as the pink noise. If you're familiar with white noise is actually constant power at every single frequency. So instead of seeing this like drop off in power as you increase in frequency, you will actually see a completely flat line for white noise. So in this case, when we say pink noise is like dropping off at a 1 over f frequency interval, that means with the increasing frequency, we're actually reducing the power of the noise. And for some reason, we see this a lot in biology and a lot of these areas. And so we can kind of model our EEG data as like that as well to say that it's some sort of noise. But again, there's still a lot of things we can sort of understand from how the brain at its resting state might have its own like neural noise. It could be interesting. It's not necessarily noise that we want to throw away. So it's there for us to look at. And then in addition to that, if we were to take a look at these little bumps, as we last time saw, power bins kind of give us like how much power there is at each frequency interval. With modeling some sort of like peak information, we can also understand like how much power there is above this 1 over f noise baseline. So here you can see that several parameters can be extracted for this little alpha bump. For example, central frequency, the power, which is the amplitude, and then bandwidth, which is like how wide the peak is. So are there any questions about this so far? And this is like only one way to parameterize this. And I guess one thing that is pretty interesting to say is that this model actually comes from the Wojtek lab, which is the advisor for DS3 club. And so it's really exciting to see that a lot of this like signal processing work is being done in data science, neural data science labs. And so we'll be interested in seeing how this affects our feature models. Okay, so if there's no questions, I'll continue a little bit of the math, not too much though. To parameterize this PSD, we can sort of think about this as two parts, as we sort of already touched on, this blue dotted line and this red line, which is the full model. Or actually, I guess in this case, it would be the green that is relevant for each of these peaks. So each of these peaks can be modeled as a Gaussian. And so we can sort of see here the Gaussian of a frequency array. The frequencies array is like the values of the frequencies here. It can be modeled with A as the amplitude or height of the peak multiplied by E to this power thingy. And this power thingy sort of gives this entire equation, this model where you have a normal sort of bell curve. I'm pretty sure all of you have like heard about the bell curves in your stats classes and things like that before. So this is basically the function for that. We have the center of that bell curve, which is at C, and then we also have the width of the bell curve, which is at W. This is normally known as like the standard deviation. So that's kind of how this model, it will basically identify these little peaks in your PSD and then give it this Gaussian and then tell you, oh, this is the center, this is the width, and this is how much amplitude there is. Secondly, we saw that that's the aperiodic, the blue dotted line part, and this noise can be sort of seen as, again, because we usually plot it on log power, right here, we have it in this like log form, but because we previously talked about this being like the 1 over f sort of noise, this exponent that is on this f is usually negative here, and this is why we get this like downward slope. So depending on this exponent, which is how slopey it is, we can get like a different slopiness. And so we can also use this as another parameter. Additionally, there is this B offset, which is just like how far it is from the left-hand side or how much, I guess, shifted it is, depending on how the model sort of fits. So we can also use that as well. All of these features are pretty new in terms of like how we analyze EEG PSDs. So there's a lot of exploration that we can do with these kind of data. And it's like pretty ongoing research in the lab as well. So some of the research that has been done in these parameters has shown pretty interesting things. So Wojtek himself, in one of his papers, found that age is correlated with a different exponent. So he got like a bunch of young people and a bunch of old people to have their EEG data collected. And then he found that for the older adults, there seems to be more noise in the higher frequencies. And this can be seen by how their PSDs sort of have a less of a slope on average. And so that's one of the analysis that have been interesting and significant so far, but there's still a lot that can be analyzed. In addition, there's the traditional power bin model analysis attempts that can also be significant, just trying to separate like what it means to have oscillation power above the noise frequency, and rather than like integrating over the entire like portion. Okay, so that's it for the like theory part of the FOOOF model. Does anyone have any questions on that? Okay, so Michael asks, is this the reason, one of the reasons why taking the integral, the pink noise can contribute to making a prediction? You're talking about the power spectral by age differences here? Yeah, so this is why one of the reasons, at least one of the reasons that have been found in literature that is significant between like neural data sets. So yeah, when we take the pink noise, when you say pink noise, I'm assuming you're talking about like this exponent and like how slopey the pink noise is. Yeah, so that could be a feature that would differentiate data sets like this. Yeah, so, but like, I guess in contrast to our previous attempts at power bin models, this can be a lot more specific because it not only takes into account like this baseline frequency noise, but also it separates it out for you. So it can help, or it could add a lot of features that are not too helpful. So we'll see how it does. Cool. Yeah, if there's not too many questions left, I'll pass it over to Tanvir, and he'll teach us a little bit about machine learning.
All right, so today I'm going to be kind of just giving more of a high-level overview of machine learning, and then I'll, like, when we go to the code demo, we'll talk about some of the code behind the models. But I won't be going too in depth into each model. But if you guys have any questions specifically about like why we choose certain models over others, or like how certain models work, please feel free to like unmute your mic, ask me a question, or like or put it in the chat. So I'll just put that out there. But to kind of introduce machine learning for any of you who might not be familiar with it, machine learning is basically defined as a subfield within computer science where we design algorithms that aim to teach computers how to learn and act without explicitly being programmed, right? And within that, there are two types of different machine learning. There's supervised machine learning and unsupervised machine learning. So when you give a supervised machine learning algorithm data, you have to give it not only the input data, but also labels for that input data. So in our case, with the neural data we have, right, we're trying to classify whether or not a single trial is of a patient raising their right hand or their left hand, right? So we're giving them the EEG data along with a label of did they move their right hand or left hand, and then the machine learning model should try to generalize and basically learn some patterns in the data to best basically make predictions on is a patient moving their right or left hand. And then unsupervised machine learning is basically we would give a unsupervised machine learning algorithm just the input data without the labels, and then it tries to infer natural structure present within the data. And what that means is it just tries to basically gather insights about just, you know, the natural phenomenon behind the data generating process behind making that data. And some examples of that include dimensionality reduction algorithms or clustering algorithms. And it's by no means an exhaustive list. The next slide would be good. Yeah. So we just mentioned dimensionality reduction. So of course, it's a form of unsupervised machine learning. And the idea of unsupervised machine learning is it wants to be, of dimensionality reduction is that we want to basically learn a transformation that will project data into a lower dimensional space, right? And the reason why this is useful is, I think there's two big reasons. One is that when we have like, as you'll see later in the code, right? The data we're working with before feature processing is about, it's about 6,000 dimensions, 6,000 different numbers from the EEG signals, right? So that's obviously pretty high dimensional, and depending on the limitations of your computing resources, right, that can be pretty expensive to compute on. So if you wanted to apply this dimensionality reduction to the data, we could reduce the 6,000 dimensions to 1,000 dimensions, right? And suddenly the data becomes 6 times faster to compute on, which is why that could be really helpful. And then the second part is that we can also reduce the impact of redundant information in the data. And basically, dimensionality reduction, right, is supposed to learn the best possible transformation to project the data into lower dimensional space. And when it does that, it tries to keep as much important information in the data as it possibly can. Well, and obviously, you know, when you're reducing the dimensions from 6,000 to 1,000, right, you can't keep every bit of information. So it'll automatically figure out basically how to discard some of the more like useless information that won't contribute much towards making a model. And then these are some of the algorithms also that are used in for dimensionality reduction. So of course, the principal component analysis, which we'll talk more about. There's also singular value decomposition and t-stochastic neighbor embeddings, and there's plenty more with much fancier names as well than those. But yeah, so the idea of this is that you guys can either use this as pre-processing for a machine learning model, or if you guys also want to get really, really creative with the data visualization part of this competition, you guys can also like reduce the dimensionality of this data and maybe try to create some cool visualizations of comparing and contrasting, left-hand trials versus right-hand trials in the two-dimensional space, right? So feel free to use some of the dimensionality reductions and get creative with making data visualizations as well, not just the machine learning modeling. Yeah, and then we just mentioned principal component analysis. It's always also abbreviated as PCA. And the idea of principal component analysis, the idea of PCA is that we want to learn a transformation of the data by basically finding the top K principal components that capture the variance of the data. And what that means is you basically want to find like when you want to transform the data from like 4 dimensions, like maybe from like 6,000 dimensions to 1,000 dimensions, right? You obviously want to keep as much information as you possibly can. And a lot of this information comes in the form of variance in your data, how one data point might be like where it might be relative to another data point in that high dimensional space. So we want to maybe preserve that, those kind of properties when we reduce it into a lower dimension. And that's exactly what principal component analysis tries to do. So to find these principal components, these top K PCs, the idea is we want to basically, if you just take in linear algebra, is compute a matrix of eigenvectors of the top K eigenvectors corresponding to the top K eigenvalues. And then when we create a matrix of those, right, you can multiply any input data by that matrix to then output a dimensionally reduced data point, right? And yeah, like the process is actually like much easier than it sounds, because I know there's like lots of vocabulary there. But there's also this visualization right here that kind of also can explain a little better what PCA tries to do, which is it tries to create these eigenvectors, right, that capture the variance data. So then when we shift it and transform it, we we basically are able to shift it like that and also reduce it by the mean, so we center the data as well. And yeah, so some of the, obviously I told you guys we're not going to go too in depth into a lot of the models that we're going to show later in the code. But most of these models we're going to show you guys are already implemented in this really nice beginner friendly and also advanced Python library scikit-learn. So the library has plenty of really easy to use implementations of these machine learning algorithms. So it has like unsupervised machine learning, it has dimensionality reduction algorithms, clustering algorithms, different classification algorithms as well that you guys can use for this project, which are really useful. And if you guys are ever confused, it's really helpful to read their documentation, especially if my guys might take DSC 80 later in college. Reading the scikit-learn documentation will really help you navigate the library. And then also I'll touch on neural networks here. So last week, or 2 weeks ago rather, we actually, DS3 had a neural networks workshop. So if you guys want to learn more about neural networks, I highly recommend you guys check out that. But the idea of a neural network basically is we want to learn a mathematical function that best fits the data using a process called gradient descent. And the basic idea of gradient descent is you have what you call a loss function, right? And what the loss function measures is how bad or how erroneous are my model's predictions when compared to the actual labels of the data, right? How far off are my predictions from the real values, right? So what gradient descent tries to do is it tries to minimize that loss by taking the appropriate derivatives and then adjusting the mathematical equation in that direction that minimizes loss. So that's the basic idea of it. And of course, I highly recommend you guys check out the workshop for more on that. But for this competition also, I'll also show you guys in the code also how you guys can use regular neural networks as well as convolutional neural networks, which are kind of meant more for images, but they also work well with this EEG data as well. And then I also kind of want to touch on another problem, which is overfitting. So later when we get into the code, you guys are going to see that these models have, like on this specific data we're working with, are overfitting to the data. And what overfitting means is that a model that is overfit basically is not able to generalize its accuracy and its predictions to data outside of the training set, right? So a good analogy I like to use for this is imagine, let's say you're studying for like a Math 20B final exam, right? And then somebody posts like the answer key to the exam you're going to take tomorrow online, and you're, instead of studying for the exam like you normally would, right? You basically think, oh wow, it's posted the entire answer key. I might as well just memorize the answer key and I'm going to get 100% of the exam, right? And then you go in next day to take that final exam and you get a different form for that exam, and you didn't actually learn the material of the class, but you instead memorized the answer key, so you completely bombed the exam because nothing what you studied, right, translated to the exam. So in this case, you studying for the exam is basically the machine learning model, where it's not able to generalize what it's learned well to new unseen data. And that's kind of what like the surprise Pikachu face is also trying to say there at the bottom. But, yeah. Then also, this is a very, very common problem in machine learning. So it kind of pops up a lot in interviews as well. So make sure you guys like understand it decently. But there's obviously plenty of different methods as well you guys can use to combat this problem. So the one most common thing you guys should 100% do is whenever you guys are giving data to train your models on, make sure you split it so that way you have a training set and a test set, right? So what happens is you keep this test set separate from your model and only train on the training data. And then when you're done, whenever your model's done training on the training data, you then evaluate on the test set to see how well it does on the test set. And oftentimes you'll find that some models will have like close to 100% accuracy in the training set, and then abysmally low accuracy on the test set, which is not what you want, because in that case, like training accuracy, like you're getting 100% on the training set doesn't exactly matter if you're like getting 50% accuracy in the test set. So that's why it's like really, really important to check that. And the second is a technique called regularization. So the idea of regularization is we basically add, it's a little mathematical, but the idea is you kind of add a penalty term to the loss function of your model. And this doesn't apply just to neural networks, it applies to many other models as well, where the idea is you try to penalize large changes in the model while it's training. So this allows the model to basically make smaller incremental changes to better improve performance, and this reduces the idea of this basically reduces overfitting. Another idea is also decreasing model complexity. So if you're working with a neural network, for example, right, and you have like, I want to say maybe like 20 layers or so of fully connected layers, like your model might get like close to 100% accuracy, right? And then it might get really, really abysmally low on the test set. And the reason why is your model is so complex that it's learning everything the training set way too perfectly, right? And then not exactly able to generalize that very, very well to the test set. So sometimes in machine learning, less is more. So your models don't always have to be these complex, massive behemoths. Like sometimes less is more. And then last but not least, we'll also cover this in the code later. And the idea is you guys can also use this sort of procedure called k-fold cross-validation. And you can also use that with something called a grid search. So k-fold cross-validation basically is the idea of taking your training set, right? So if you have your training set, right, and you define k to be 4, you divide your training set into 4 different equally sized pieces. And what will happen is you separate one of those pieces as a holdout set and then train on the other 3 and then evaluate on this one, right? And then what you do next is you take the same model and train it on, you then hold out another one of those sets and then train on the remaining 3 and then repeat that process until you have 4 different fitted models, right? And with that idea, you can then basically average out the testing accuracy you got in each of those folds to data to get a better idea of your model's ability to generalize to new data. And then with sklearn as well, you guys can combine this with something called a grid search. And the idea of a grid search is you basically, a model has these things called hyperparameters with them, right? And hyperparameters affect how complex the model is, how does the model learn, how does the model train. And sometimes a lot of this sort of stuff is like, it's a lot of trial and error because there's no mathematical perfect way to figure out what hyperparameter is perfect for each model. So a grid search is going to basically try every single combination of those hyperparameters until you find something that works best. So we'll show that in the code later. Yep, so now we're going to go into our notebook demo as well. So in case you guys have not basically installed or cloned our repo, here are the instructions to do that.
Yeah, we could take a maybe 3-minute break. Come back.
Yeah.
Maybe 4 minutes.
Yeah, 4 minutes. I say we give until 6:45 and then you.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions as well, like having troubles, like if you guys maybe have cloned this repo before and are like having trouble pulling the changes we made, like just we can help you troubleshoot it right now. But also, like while we're waiting right now, like if you guys had any questions about anything Ealing and I just talked about, like this is a perfect opportunity to like ask us any of those questions. Even I don't know, even something that's like maybe we didn't cover, but you guys are curious about for this competition, just let us know.
Hi, I have a question about the competition.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you suggest, like based on this specific competition, what would you suggest us, like what kind of model did you suggest us to make? And like what kind of pre-processing or feature extraction do you think is going to be most helpful in the context of the competition?
Yeah, so basically, actually, we're gonna like in our code demo here in a little bit, we're going to basically show off, like I've basically applied a bunch of different of the sklearn models, like decision trees, random forest, support vector machines, and we've tried them all basically on the data, and you guys will also see how they perform on the data as well. And then, but it seems like, at least from what I've seen so far, is neural networks have actually been performing the best out of every single other model. Like they've been getting about like 73% accuracy, test accuracy about, while most of the other models are hovering around 65%-ish. But obviously, as you'll see also, a lot of these models are also having overfitting problems. And they can be easily solved, don't get me wrong. It's just we also kind of want to let you guys also kind of take a crack at solving these overfitting problems. Because as you can see, like it doesn't take a lot of code to actually put together a model that can get like 70% training accuracy, sorry, 70% testing accuracy. And that's a pretty solid submission to Kaggle, right? So it's up to you guys now, like how you want to solve some of those issues now, and then submit a maybe stronger submission.
When you were training the model, do you use raw data or do you pre-process the data and like extract features by what we learned in today's lecture and last time's lecture?
Yeah, so basically a lot of the sklearn models we're using in the code demo, we actually used some of the features that Keeling extracted, right? And those did pretty well. The main difference between neural networks and a lot of other different models is that neural networks are really, really good for really high dimensional data, right? So the neural network would perform better when it's just given the raw data, and then it's given the ability to just learn its own features from the data and then output predictions. So the short answer is basically, right, like if you want to use some of these more sklearn models, right, these models don't do too well with high dimensional data. So it's better to, give it in like pre-processed features. But if you want to use a neural network, it's perfectly fine to give it this really, really high dimensional data, as well as maybe add some pre-processed features on top of that if you want as well.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
All right, 6:46. Let's get started.
Yep. All right. So Gillian, do you want to also then start with your section of the demo?
Yeah. Okay. Everyone can see this?
Yep, looks good on my end.
Awesome. All right, so we have pretty much the same thing as last time. Constants. This time we're loading epoch data and also features from last time. So if you have the notebook from last time, there's an easy way you can like sort of either you pull from the new thing, new repo. It's the same repo actually. You'll have these two new pickles. So for W1, that stands for workshop 1. These are the features that we had last time. And then W2 is going to be the features that we're going to be adding in this time as well. So loading in the features from last time, if you ever lose this file, you can always recreate it by just adding the feature df2 pickle in the first 01 notebook that you have. So we last time have a bunch of these power bins and theta beta ratios and a lot more things. You can always add more frequency band ratios. You can always add more differences between different channels. So there's still more features that you can add that is not in this data frame. So this might be one reason you might want to go ahead and create your own W1 feature DF pickle from the other notebook. But yeah, right now we're just going to work with the ones that we created already. And yeah, let's add some more features. So last time we also talked about NeuroDSP and the instantaneous amplitude, things like that. This time we're going to extract specifically the median value of the instantaneous amplitude. So this is just like one example of how you can get a single value out of this instantaneous amplitude time series that you get from last time. And so what we do here is basically we run the amp by time over this alpha range, and we get this value that we can add to this dictionary, create another data frame, and then concatenate it to our feature data frame. Cool, so this is the data frame that we get from the alpha instantaneous measurement, and then by concatenating it, we see that we have it here as well. So you can think of more things you might want to do with this, like trying other frequency ranges, maybe not taking the median, but taking like standard deviation or mean or derivatives at some point in time, taking the average of the derivatives. You can like come up with your own features after, I guess, looking through data and then seeing how you might want to do that. Cool, so now we have one example of using this instantaneous measure in our feature data frame. Here, now let's also add in the FOOOF stuff we were talking about earlier. We already understood what the model does, but in case you want to see the annotated model, you can like create it here. And let's see what happens when we predict it on one EEG trace. So when we run it on, say, this CZ electrode at trial 0, we get something like this. You can see that the PSD is a lot noisier. And so what we can analyze is this aperiodic fit, which is that blue dotted line that we were looking at earlier, and also the red fit on the top. And so here you can see how there's like these somewhat of a smoother peaks. They're not like complete Gaussians, but they have like some shape of a Gaussian, and that's what they're trying to assume is a oscillation bump. And so some of the features that we can see here is that there's 6 peaks that were found. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I guess these two counted as 2. And so here we see that there's like a central frequency value, a peak power value, and then a bandwidth value. So these are all features that we can then use for our model. There's some goodness of fit metrics. And then, oh yeah, aperiodic parameters. There's the offset, which is the b that we were looking at, and then the exponent, which is that 1 over f value, the exponent for that. Cool. So yeah, that's what it looks like on one. If we were to average all of the PSDs for the 2 classes, we get 2 of them like this. And this is over one of the electrodes, I believe. Yeah, so C4, we're looking at C4 here. And you can see how this model sort of fits the curve and then can also give us these values of these peaks. And we can see how the power for these can be different depending on the class that we're in. Cool. So over here, there's a big chunk of cell that like sort of creates these FOOOF parameters, the central frequency, amplitude, and then also bandwidth, in order for it to be added to the feature data frame. This one, I will caution that it takes about 8 minutes to run on my computer. So only, or you can decide when you want to run it, but like just be aware that you might not be able to use your notebook for about 8 minutes if you do try to run it. But yeah, after that you get data frame with all these values for specifically, in this case, I only did it for alpha. So basically when you do it for alpha, you only get the peaks that are within the alpha range, which is 8 to 12 or 7 to 12, however you want to define it. And then it will take these 3 values and average them in this case. Sometimes you do have multiple peaks in a frequency range, so that might be why you would need to average it. But yeah, you can do whatever you want with all the 3 different peaks. Yeah, so that's another way you might want to extract features from your PSDs. Yeah, are there any questions about this part? Yeah, if you do pull the data, there's the 2 pickles already, so you wouldn't even need to run this big cell in order to get these features. But yeah, these pickles don't contain like all the features you might want to look at. And so that's one way you might want to try to explore, is to get these features, get more features yourself, add them to these data frames, and then try to run these machine learning models on them. All right, yeah, if there's no questions for now, I'll pass it over to Tanvir. Do you want to share your screen, or should I?
Yeah, I can share screen then right now.
All right, cool.
So we'll just give it this. Okay. So I was just running this big cell, so I'm going to hope it kind of finishes up right now. Otherwise, I'll just stop it and move on. But I think since it's output at 600, right? It should be done soon.
No, I should go up to like 3,600.
Oh, never mind then. I'm just going to stop it. Okay.
Yeah.
Or just let that be for now. But we will basically load up the pickle file, right? And as you can see, these are the extracted features that Healing was just showing above. So we basically, to start, right, we've have a lot of these import statements from sklearn and also from TensorFlow's Curious API for building neural networks. So we'll kind of like, as we go through the models, we'll kind of touch on each of these things. But to start, you obviously want to check if maybe any of your columns have any null values, and obviously none of them do. So yeah, so since none of the columns have null values, nothing's going to really change there. But now we're going to use this train test split method from sklearn to basically split our data into training and test sets, like we kind of talked about earlier, to prevent overfitting. So we'll run that really quickly. And as you can see right here, we have 2,760 training data points and then 920 testing data points. So that's a pretty decent size to have. So the first model we're going to be trying basically is logistic regression. And if you want to look at maybe more about the logistic regression function that's in sklearn, I provided a link in the notebook as well. But the basic idea of logistic regression is that we basically apply a linear regression model to the data, but the linear regression model then feeds into a function called sigmoid, which then maps the output of that linear regression model to a probability between 0 and 1. And then that probability is what you output to classify a data point as someone raising their left hand or the right hand, right? 0 or 1. So basically here, we will call log model.fit on the input data and then the labels, right? So with this function, when we fit the model, it'll basically then start to learn how to map those inputs to the labels. And then after that, we'll calculate the predictions of our fitted model on the training and testing sets and calculate their accuracies. So if we run that right here, we're able to get about 66% training accuracy and 65% testing accuracy. And this is by far the simplest model out of all of these, and it's already pretty decent. So obviously with some tweaks to this, if you wanted to maybe mess around with some of the hyperparameters that they talk about in logistic regression, you can maybe get that even higher. The next type of model we'll talk about here, it's basically the same code. The only thing I'm really changing from cell to cell right now is the actual model being used, right? Is a decision tree. And the basic idea of a decision tree is as the model trains and learns from the input data, it'll basically create branches where it'll figure out like thresholds, basically, where if something's greater than a certain value or less than a certain value, right? It'll then branch them off, and then and this tree will basically kind of grow deeper and deeper. That's the term, basically. It'll be a deeper and deeper tree. And the leaves of the tree will correspond to predictions as 0 or 1, right? And the structure of this tree is what the model's learning from the data. And I know that explanation wasn't too perfect, but if you guys have any questions later, you guys can obviously ask. But as you can see, this model is overfitting pretty hard, where it's able to get 100% training accuracy and only 60% testing accuracy. So it's outperformed. So technically, our logistic regression model, which is simpler than the decision tree, is able to do better. And this is kind of what I was talking about for combating overfitting, where you want to have sometimes less complex models so you can generalize better the testing data set. So this is a perfect example of that. Yeah. Michael's asking, do decision trees tend to overfit? As you can see, yes, they do. But if you were to maybe apply cross-validation with a grid search, you can probably tweak it around. So you can basically tweak around some of the hyperparameters and maybe add some regularization to prevent that. Yeah, so the next part is random forests. So the idea of a random forest is it's basically an ensemble of decision trees. So you basically take multiple decision trees, right, and train them all at once, and then average out their predictions to come out with a final prediction, right? So it's a more complex model than the regular decision tree. And as you can see here, we are overfitting again pretty hard. We're 100% training accuracy, but our testing accuracy is better than it was with the regular decision tree. And that's mainly probably due to certain ensemble trees learning better features. And then, when predictions get ensembled together, they'll tend to be more accurate than just a single decision tree. And then next model we'll talk about is AdaBoost. And AdaBoost is basically what we would call a gradient boosting algorithm. And there's plenty more of those types of algorithms as well. And within sklearn, there's XGBoost, and I think that there's a couple more than that that I don't know off the top of my head. But the idea of a gradient boosting algorithm is it's a lot like, they function very similar to random forests, where they're basically ensemble decision trees. But these decision trees that the AdaBoost algorithm are generating are very, very shallow, where we're probably getting trees that are less than 4 branches deep, right? And we're ensembling a bunch of them together, and the mathematical procedure it uses to actually train the model is much different. So that's a little more mathy and a little more low level, but we'll train that really quickly. And as we can see here, this model is probably like the, other than logistic regression, it's overfitting the least, where we're getting around 70% training accuracy, 65% testing. So that's not bad at all. And the last of the sklearn models we want to talk about is support vector machines. So the idea of a support vector machine is this model basically wants to draw a hyperplane. Or so if you basically have taken like Math 20C, right? And you've looked at like 3D graphs in 3-dimensional space, you've obviously dealt with like 2-dimensional planes in that 3D space that can maybe separate data points, right? So the idea of a support vector machine is that it wants to learn about a hyperplane in like, I believe, let me look at the shape really quickly. So we have 19 features, right? So technically our data is 19-dimensional. So it basically wants to learn an 18-dimensional plane that best separates these 19-dimensional data points. And there's obviously more math than that. I've kind of oversimplified it, but it performs pretty similarly to AdaBoost. Now, what I'm about to show you with this, like I talked about grid search with cross-validation before, and the idea is you basically separate your data into folds and train your model on each different fold basically and validate it on a holdout set. And then grid search is the idea of defining you give a list of hyperparameters you want to try out, and it will try every single combination of these hyperparameters together, and then eventually get what is considered the best model. So for this, I'm going to use the AdaBoost classifier because I think it performed pretty well up here. So we might as well try to fine tune it a little more using grid search cross-validation. But you guys can obviously use this grid search CV function with any of these models we talked about up here. And if you guys want to learn more about how to use this function, right, the idea is you basically feed it in a classifier, and then you give it a set of parameters you want to try to make combinations with. And if you want to learn how to like, structure this dictionary you give it, you have to look at the model's documentation. So if we want to look at AdaBoost, right, we'll look at AdaBoost has number of estimators and learning rate. These are 2 different parameters that we can adjust around to adjust to basically change our performance, right? So we provide it with a list of n estimators to use and a list of learning rates to try, and then it will give us the best combination of those. So this obviously is a pretty expensive procedure because that's to train with every single combination of these. So yeah, can models made by TensorFlow be passed into grid search CV? Unfortunately, no, but you guys can obviously write your own cross-validation procedures if you would like to. I believe there are also plenty of different open source libraries that people have written to do this sort of thing. And then obviously, you guys can just, what's it called? You guys can just, like most people when they're training deep learning models will just kind of do guess and check until they find what works best. So that is also not too bad of an option either. But yeah, you can definitely write your own grid search algorithm as well if you wanted to. It's not too hard to write, to be honest. But yeah, as you can see right now, right? So AdaBoost before grid search cross-validation was overfitting slightly, like it was about maybe a 5% gap between training and testing accuracy. But after using this grid search CV function, it's like barely, it's not really overfitting anymore. They're basically like, these accuracies are basically the same, and we're able to get our testing accuracy higher than it was before. So you guys can obviously try this function using any of these models above here and see if you guys get anything else. You can even just like what different parameters you want to try. Obviously, I tried every single number of estimators from 30 to, so I tried 30, 40, 50, 60, all the way to 100, right? So you guys can maybe try a different set of number of estimators as well and see if you get anything better. But I'll leave it up to you guys. So you guys can also kind of mess around with it to get a better model. So yeah, so obviously this all used, all these models up here used the features that Geeling showed how to extract above, right? Now, when using a neural network, right? Neural networks are really, really good, of course, at high dimensional data, and they're really good at learning its own features from the high dimensional data. So it doesn't necessarily need pre-processing as much as these other models. So we're going to basically load in the epoch train pickle file that you guys can find on the Kaggle download. And to get an idea of like the dimensionality of this data, I'm basically just going to list out all the shapes, right? So each of these channels are 1,000 dimensional, right? So for a neural network to be able to take this data as an input, we're going to concatenate all these NumPy arrays into basically 6,000 dimensional matrices, right? And that's what this code here right here does, where it basically applies this np.concatenate function to every single row, and then we'll create the two-dimensional matrix we want to train our model with. So yeah, there you can see that we have 3,680 trials by 6,000 data points. And then we'll split our data into training and test sets like we did before. So yeah, we have 2,760 training examples, 920 testing examples. So this part will be a little more complex than before, like what was earlier. So we're basically right now using the TensorFlow library, which is basically deep learning, open source deep learning library made by Google. And within TensorFlow, there's something called TensorFlow.Keras, which is basically this high-level API written by Francis Cholet, which basically lets you create a neural network in what is literally 3 lines right here, which is pretty incredible because neural networks are actually a pretty complex type of model. So we're basically creating, we created a neural network model with 5 fully connected layers, with 2,048 neurons in the first layer, and then it outputs 1 value at the end, which is just a single probability of whether someone is raising their left hand or right hand. And obviously you guys can also mess around with the neural network architecture, maybe mess around with the number of neurons in each layer, maybe mess around with adding more layers, removing some layers. So that's up to you. But this basically will create the model using Keras' sequential API. This will then define what kind of optimizer we want to use on the model. So this basically defines like basically how the model will actually train. And then this actually will then compile the model and define the loss function that we want to use to perform gradient descent on. So then this neural network.fit model, sorry, the .fit function is basically a lot the same thing as the sklearn.fit function, where we give it the input data, we give it the labels, and now it's time for the model to just learn what it can. And then obviously you can also specify how many epochs, or basically how many run-throughs of the data set do you want to run, like how many times do you want to run through the entire data set. So we want to run through every single training example 15 times. And we want to load in 64 training examples at a time. So we'll run that. It'll take a little longer than the sklearn models, but it isn't too bad. Especially if you're running in a GPU, it goes pretty fast. So you can kind of see how loss is decreasing throughout and accuracy is also increasing. So after 15 epochs, we're about 94% training accuracy. And if we plot what that looks like, we're minimizing loss and raising accuracy throughout the training process. And our final neural network's accuracy is about 70% on the test set. So this simple neural network basically outperformed every other model from before by learning its own features from the input data. And obviously, this isn't a perfect neural network, so you guys can modify this architecture yourself and try to see if you can do anything better than what I did. And obviously, you can also see there's a massive overfitting problem where it's 94% training accuracy and then 70% testing accuracy. So you guys can use any of those methods we talked about before to reduce the overfitting. And then the next step of neural network architecture we're going to talk about.
Hey, quick question.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, and the first line, what were you concatenating? Do you mind just going over that again?
Oh yeah. So basically, right, these channels, right, each of them have a 1,000 dimensional NumPy array, right?
Okay.
So I'm basically kind of just, so when I say axis equals 1 right here, right, I want to concatenate across the rows, right? So I'm concatenating every single NumPy array on a row, all into one.
Gotcha. Cool. Thanks.
And then actually, that's actually perfect because the main difference between like the pre-processing that I did up here and what we do for the convolutional neural network. So the convolutional neural network basically is another type of neural network, and it's much more popular with images, basically with like 2D matrices, which are what images are, 2D matrices of pixels, right? So we can't just stack the arrays into like 6,000 dimensional arrays like we were doing before. But instead what we want is we want to make 1,000 by 6 dimensional matrices. So it's kind of like the same thing as like a 1,000 by 6 image almost, if that kind of makes sense, right? And that's what we kind of be inputting into the convolutional neural network. So as you can see, this is kind of like, this is what the shape of our training and testing set look like. And this is what our convolutional neural network architecture looks like. So we have 2 different convolutional layers here with 32 output channels and a 3x3 kernel, and 64 output channels and a 3x3 kernel as well. And then after we apply convolution, we'll flatten it into a one-dimensional, we'll flatten our 2-dimensional matrices into a 1-dimensional matrix, and then feed into 3 different densely connected layers. So this code is like, it's pretty similar to what we did above. And then we'll finally fit it on the new data here. And obviously, guys, like, this is pretty basic architectures, but you guys can also do plenty of customization on top of this to get better performance than we have here. So yeah, at the end of training, we got about 98% test training accuracy, and our graphs look pretty good for training. And then if we evaluate, we have about the same accuracy we got in the test set as the regular neural network with the same overfitting problem. So if you guys are looking to, make submissions to the competition, you guys can just start with a starter code and kind of modify the models until you maybe get something that works better. Like do some research on how you guys can maybe fix overfitting, and you guys will probably have some pretty good, competitive submissions for this competition. But that's pretty much it for me. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to go for it. What was the test loss on the convnet? We got about 0.09, and then compared to the regular neural network, it was significantly lower actually, which is interesting. Oh, sorry, the test loss, not the training loss, my bad. The test loss is 1.2, and then up here it's 2.7, which is strange because they got basically the same accuracy. But yeah.
Yeah, and there's actually a couple neural networks that have been looked at a lot for EEG data. I'll put them in the chat. One's called EEGNet.
Yeah, that's another thing. Like, what's really, really popular in the machine learning field, if you guys want to pursue machine learning as a career, right, is a lot of machine learning work is about like reading research papers, seeing what architectures work for different problems, and then kind of just like adapting researchers' works to your own problems, right? So if you guys find any other papers like this where people are working with EEG data, kind of just maybe, use their architectures that work and try and see if you can get anything better.
I have a question on pre-processing. So I
Yeah.
remember in the last lecture, I remember like we do like high or low pass filter because like I know like EEG data above like certain frequency is just not like it's just not gonna do anything. So I was wondering if you at least apply low or high filter in training neural network, or you just did the entirely raw data.
So here we did the entirely raw data, but you bring up a good point where like obviously not every single data like part of the data is going to be meaningfully contributing towards a prediction, right? So another way you guys can also improve performance is also applying some sort of pre-processing, right? The low high pass filter sounds like a pretty good idea. So you guys can kind of throw away some of the noise in the data. And I think that could actually be really like something you guys could use to also improve performance. So yeah. Do you have any notes also, Geeling?
Yeah, that sounds good. Other things, you could probably also incorporate like the time series that we looked at last time with amplitudes and phases, things like that. See if there's any way we can use CNNs or neural networks to analyze that as well. Other pre-processing, there is like a whole section of like trying to remove the I artifacts from the neural data, but I can upload like a notebook that sort of does that to use ICA independent component analysis to extract the EOG channels from the EEG or from the, I guess, brain data that we're more interested in. So that's another way you can like sort of pre-process the EEG channels so that you have more like neural data rather than, oh, I blinked and then I blinked more on the left trials versus the right trials. So this is why you're classifying it like that. Okay, yeah.
Also, another thing to also touch on was like we also talked about dimensionality reduction in the presentation, but we didn't actually do a demo of it. But like all these things that we're talking about with the artifact removal and also the low high pass filters, these are all about kind of reducing noise in the data, and basically redundant data that might not be useful in making predictions. So even applying like dimensionality reduction, like PCA, would also help a good amount for these neural networks or even for the sklearn models. Like the reason why we're not using like the 6,000 dimensional data with the sklearn models is like that's kind of too high dimensional, right? But if you wanted to apply PCA on the raw data and then put it into an sklearn model, that could also like do pretty well. So we obviously haven't done that ourselves, but it's pretty straightforward too if you wanted to do it on your own. So I definitely recommend trying that as an experiment as well if you are curious about building these models.
Yeah, and then another one of the networks that I've seen before is this shallow FBCSP net. This is sort of like a shallowish CNN or CubNet that also tries to analyze neural data. So the thing with most of these networks is that rather than like sort of working well on image data, you have ways to sort of extract frequency data out of your signals as well. So not only does it do like a spatial sort of convolution, but it also does a like time series convolution to get you like that frequency domain information that we've been extracting. So maybe sort of looking into how these models are structured and maybe either implementing them by using their code, or you can even like put it together in the models that Tanvir has showed today. So that's another avenue of interest that might be of interest. Yeah, and also I guess because we have another option for workshops for next time, be sure to tell us or let us know which ones you might be more interested in, like hearing more about in a workshop.
Yeah, and also guys, make sure to remember also, even if you guys are not into the machine learning part of this competition, we are also giving out a prize for best data visualization. So like mess around with some of the dimensionality reduction methods in sklearn, and you guys can come out with like some nice looking data vises that you guys can use to kind of visualize this data. And obviously like dimensionality reduction is not the only thing you can use to also make good data visualization. So like check out also some of the other notebooks we've had, because they also do help give you some ideas of how you can break down this data using data viz.
Tanvir, I have a question for you. What is the training size of your training set?
Yeah, so when we split it, we had about 2760 training points, like data points in the training set.
And what is the proportion of that, like contrast to like all the data provided by Kaggle?
Yeah, let me just check. Wait, so training test split. I'm not, see, obviously right now in this function, I'm not providing like a percentage by which to what's it called, split it by, but by default, the testing set is 1/4 of the total training data.
Yeah, but I'm saying like when you load the data, like when you load all the data, like how much is it compared to the entire Kaggle data set? Because I look at the Kaggle data set and like it seems like they provided more than at least 10,000.
Okay, so I know that so one thing to note was that these epoch data, so right here, this epoch data is actually stored in a pickle file. So I'm guessing what I'm assuming is when you were exploring on Kaggle, right, you're probably exploring through the CSVs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the CSVs are actually the raw data for this competition, right? But to make training and also labeling the data for doing submissions easier, we actually converted. We basically did some pre-processing to make this sort of like nicely structured data frame for machine learning into these pickle files. So these pickle files can actually be like, you can't, when you click on them in the Kaggle browser, you actually can't see the columns or anything like that, right?
Yeah, I cannot see it.
Yeah. So when you're doing your like you're modeling and you're also making your submissions, you should make sure to use the epoch data. But the reason why we also included the raw data was that if you guys wanted to also like do some more data visualization with the raw data, or you maybe wanted to learn more about maybe extracting other features from the raw data, you guys can also do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, do you also want to fit, like, do we have some other slides as well to go through?
No, that's it. Basically, it's open hours till 8.
Yeah. And then we also have these other upcoming events for Neurotech if you want to talk about that.
Oh, yeah. We plan to have an event in week 9 for
there we go.
what we did for our Neurotech X competition. And then just as a reminder to let us know what you want for week 2 of winter quarter. And then after the end of week 3 is going to be when we're going to wrap up this competition. So we'll be excited for all your submissions, and hopefully after that we'll do like some sort of event where we can maybe share all the hard work you guys have done. So yeah, look forward to seeing you guys out. And yeah, these are just more links. Thanks
yeah, so we'll stick around while you guys still have questions. So like if you guys have any, like, if you guys maybe, like, even if you don't want to talk about some of the models we've talked about today, but maybe have some other ideas, I'm more than happy to, like, maybe tell you guys what I think of some of your ideas as well, or maybe help you like troubleshoot this sort of stuff. I don't know. And obviously, if you guys have questions after this while you guys are like working on these models, you're on your own, and want to maybe help troubleshooting or whatever, like make sure to use our Discord for this challenge and like drop any questions in there or message me or Keeling.
Tanvir, I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
So assuming you use all the data that's given to train your model and you arrive at 98% accuracy,
Yeah.
for the convolutional neural network model, does that mean our submission has to be at least better than 98%?
See, that's the problem with overfitting, right? So like if, for example, you skipped, like I'm assuming, right? The idea is you're wanting to maybe skip this step of splitting the data, right? And then just train on the entire training set and then submit, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so if you did that, right, like obviously you won't know, you can't really expect to understand how well your data will do in the test set until Kaggle tells you how well it actually did, right? On the leaderboard. So that's why it's definitely recommended for you guys to split the data yourself. So that way, like, because I think with Kaggle, right, when you submit like your predictions to the leaderboard, it takes a little while to process, right? So if you want to evaluate how well your model is every time you train your new model, it can get kind of like really, really tedious. So it's kind of recommended to like evaluate in your own test set locally, and then when you're feeling confident, then kind of submit that.
Okay. So do you use all the data that's given?
Technically, no. But I guess this is also not a bad idea. So if you like, we talked about like cross-validation before, right?
Yeah.
So cross-validation in machine learning is actually mostly used, like obviously, to find the most optimal set of hyperparameters, right? So if you find, like, if you use this sort of like procedure where you split the data and then are able to find like a perfect convolutional architecture as well as all the perfect hyperparameters that will get you like 90% test accuracy and 90% training accuracy, right? Then you can kind of keep the model the same and then train it on the entire train data and then submit, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I think my question is like your cross-validation data set plus your test data set plus your training data set, is the total like the total that the Kaggle data set give you? Or do you kind of take fraction of the Kaggle data set and you do the split?
Oh, no. You should definitely take, so the Kaggle data set has like it has the epoch train data and the epoch test data, right? And the train data from you download from Kaggle has labels. So, but the test data that you download from Kaggle does not have labels. So you can really only use this training data. Like this is all the data you're basically given. So, like obviously you're completely free to like. And is your question basically in this notebook? Did we use all the training data given on Kaggle?
Yes.
Yeah, in this notebook we used every single all the data that you can download from Kaggle.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, any other ideas? Like even if you guys have any other ideas and maybe what you might want to try on your own, like we can also maybe help you like figure things out with that. Yeah. All right. Seems like most people are leaving. You got anything also, Joel? Any questions you want to maybe ask? You are our last workshop participant remaining. I'm good for now. All right. Sounds good. See you guys later. All right. That's everybody gone now.